is a new day. You survived the other day, and now you're here today, and that's a good thing. We're making progress. I hope that we're making progress. I hope that you got some rest yesterday and last evening. I also hope that you got to look ahead, read ahead, and maybe read some in some of the text that I've given you, like any of them. Any of them at all. Do be reading the Biotap book, okay? Because it actually does have a lot of detail, a lot of theory, a lot of specifics, a lot of rationale for the tapping that sometimes I don't discuss in class. So if you don't actually read the book, you'll never actually run across the concept. And it might be the one concept that makes it all click for you. Don't know. I don't have any way of knowing that. Okay? The 49 principles of what is Thai yoga, I think, is also really important. It's a textbook. It's probably one of the most important textbooks that we have. Even though I know that some of you will find, when you start reading some of the theory, like the sympathetic atonia, maybe more scientific than you're normally inclined to be reading from a psychological point of view, from a psychological science point of view. Tough. Deal with it. Learn how to read above your grade level. It's something my mom actually used to tell me when I was quite young. Learn how to read above your grade level. Doesn't matter what grade you're in. What matters is your reading proficiency, comprehension, and retention. That's it. That's all that matters. And you know, my mom was proven to be right. I learned how to read. I learned how to read really well. And because I learned how to read really well, that's, I would have to say, the single, other than just kind of dogged determinedness, the single greatest factor toward why I have accumulated 5 doctorates plus a master's degree in clinical herbology plus 50 or 70 other adjunct certifications at expert or higher level, at teacher or higher level, is because I can read. Riff. Reading is fun. Because I can read. And because I can and by reading, by what I mean by I say that is not just skim the words on a page, but actually to have some idea what they mean, to have some comprehension, and then to have some retention of them. And I think I think it's a really important skill. Now, Pakru Samai had a college degree from Oxford. He went to Oxford on a scholarship given to him by the King of Thailand. So he could read and he could speak English better than I can. Because, you know, I'm from Georgia. We speak what's called the, lovingly, the colloquial vernacular of the genteel South, y'all. So I speak a dialect. I grew up speaking dialect of Southern something. Wolf speak, Southern wolf speak. What wolves in the South speak. That's what I grew up speaking, y'all. You know, and Pakru Samai spoke the King's English. When he spoke English, he spoke it with a British accent. And very clear, very precise. And he thought I used a lot of extra words to describe things that weren't necessary for the purpose of the discussion. And he was fond of telling me so, because that's English. You know, in other words, the King's English, there is a lot of hyperbole, a lot of inflection, a lot of descriptors in the language that British people just don't use. And that is one of the reasons why sometimes in the past we had a lot of trouble understanding each other. All right? But reading is important and will always be important. One thing that Pa Kusumai was really good at, because he had also been a monk for many years, okay, he had learned how to read and write and speak the Pali language, the language of the original Buddhist sutras and scriptures. And so every day he spent a certain amount of time reading Pali text. Every day he spent a certain amount of time reading Pali text. Much the same that maybe a Christian person might spend some part of their day reading a Bible or reading a commentary, or a Muslim might spend some time reading the Quran or reading some Muslim author. Maybe they're Sufi, so they read Jalaluddin Rumi, okay, or American authors like Rashad Field, which, by the way, Rumi's brilliant. You know, we talk about the practical expression of love. That's what defines what we do, literally. That's how this work has always been defined in Thai medicine, is the practical expression of love. In the Muslim world, the equivalent of that philosophy originates with Rumi. And so if you can get a copy, English translation of the Mathnawi, for example, or Rumi's text, or you can get transliterations from people like Rashad Field, it'll blow your mind, because he is universally recognized as one of the most eloquent speakers on the subject of what is love on the planet Earth there's ever been in the history of the planet Earth, is Jalaluddin Rumi. And if you haven't read Rumi, you've kind of missed something. Another dimension of this idea of the practical expression of love. And see, the thing is, we can learn from every culture's definitions of love. Especially, we can learn where the definitions are not based on just sort of airy-fairy concepts of puppy love or hormonal love. For example, in the original versions of the Bible, wherever the word love is used in the text, well, there's 5 different words that are used, where in the modern text it just says the word love. And so, for example, the 2 biggest differentiations, which you won't know because you're not reading it in Aramaic or Greek, in the original Greek, is agape, phileo, eros. Those are, we'll say, 3 primary divisions: agape, phileo, eros. Okay? And agape is a kind of love that is expressed by God. And another way of saying it is by Great Spirit, or by undifferentiated cosmic consciousness, or consciousness which is not concerned with how things look or how things feel. In other words, it's a concept of love that is not defined by feeling. Feelings are irrelevant in agape. Irrelevant. Doesn't matter. And the most concrete example I can give you of agape is every morning the sun rises and there's life on the planet another day. That's agape. Because the sun doesn't care if you appreciate it or not. Doesn't care. The sun doesn't care if you feel love or appreciation of the sun. Sun doesn't care. Could care less. Your care and consideration in reciprocation of the expression of love, which even in traditional texts of Buddhist texts and Christian texts and Muslim texts, by the way, they all share this concept. They often describe God's love as light. L-I-G-H-T. not L-I-T-E. But as light. They all describe agape love as a manifestation of light. Why? Because one of the only things that we, all of us human beings, can point to as an origin of life, uniformly, agreeably, without a whole lot of argument, is the light from the sun. This is the basis of the Egyptian religions. They're very practical people. They looked around and they said, what is the one constant? What is the one constant in nature that provides life? And without it, there would be no life. And they look up and they go, oh, sun, oh, Ra, oh, the source of light. And in the Christian Bible, in the Aramaic text, Jesus is actually called Amun-Ra. He's called the source of light. Literally. In the Aramaic, it's one of the 100 names of God, one of the 100 names of Jesus. And in Sufi Muslim religion, they have the 100 names of God, which they quote in a religious ceremony, a mantra called zikr. And zikr is really beautiful. And zikr is a meditation where you recite the 100 names of God. And thereby reciting the 100 names of God, you resonate with the essence of what those 100 names are trying to communicate as a sum, right? And Buddhism, and some people, and maybe even Rama, you might, I don't know if you'd agree or disagree with me, but my Buddhist teachers told me that Buddhism was not a religion. That's what they told me. They said, we don't worship the Buddha like a god, like a deity, like that kind of thing. They said that's completely wrong. And when people say that Buddhist people worship the Buddha, I get it. It makes sense if you watch people being devoted and making offerings to offers and whying, to the Buddha. But in essence, though, what they're doing is they are acknowledging that what is in front of them conceptually is also within them. And no greater and no lesser. Okay? But the Buddha has 10,000 names. 10,000 names for the Buddha. And one of those names is light. And there are different ways that the light is described or manifested. So, for example, there might be a sutra that talks about the blue crystal medicine Buddha. Okay? And in that sutra, one of the first things that it describes about the Buddha is the light emanating from the third eye of the Buddha, emanating from the Buddha, the light. And the light is equivalent to life. The light is equivalent to consciousness, which is undefiled by obfuscation, which is one of my favorite words. I'll call that my 50-cent word for the day. Obfuscation means things that are intentionally not clear. Another literal definition of the word obfuscation is a lie. But there are lies that we do on purpose, and there are lies we do by accident. Unintentional lies, which are driven by naivete, ignorance, and misunderstanding, and or confusion, and or limited context. And there are a lot of mythologies about how we misunderstand things that should be obvious. And get very adamant about declaring the truth of our reality and the truth of our perception. And yet, at the very same moment as we are adamantly declaring our clarity of understanding, we are completely wrong and completely ignorant. And in Thailand, in Thai Buddhism, children are taught this story about the four wise men who are blind, the four blind wise men who encounter an elephant. children in Thailand are taught this story about the 4 blind men who encounter an elephant on the road. And so they're walking along the road and they bump into the elephant, and they're surprised because they run into this obstacle and they're like, what have we encountered here? And so the first guy goes, oh, we are in a forest and I have run into a great tree. Because he bumped into the leg, right? And another guy goes, oh, no, we're in a rocky place and I haven't run into a wall. You know, because he bumped into the side of the elephant. You know, and another one goes, oh, we're in a dangerous place. I've encountered a giant python. And I think it's got a hold of me. It's going to eat me or squeeze me to death because he got a hold of the trunk. And the last guy goes, oh, you guys are stupid. We're not even an arm's length apart, and every one of you is completely, totally wrong because I have encountered a giant bristly brush, a plant with bristles, because he ran into the tail. Okay? And so all 4 of them are correct in that they've encountered something. But yet their direct personal observation is completely wrong. That none of them are right. They all 4 have simply encountered an elephant. And I'm sure that the second that the elephant trumpeted and called out, that all of them wet their pants. And they would now have that experience together. Right? It's good luck to walk under an elephant's belly. It's good luck. So even if you avoid all that and just go under the elephant's belly, that's good luck. I've done that a few times. I think it's good luck because you didn't die. You know, the elephant didn't step on you while you were going under the elephant's belly. But so we think about love and what is the practical expression of love, and this is important in tapping, okay? Because what is another definition of an old unresolved negative emotional issue, or a NEMO, I call them? Old unresolved negative emotional issue. Well, because it's something from the past that is a bit of information that is stored in the tissue, which is both using energy. As long as it's stored in the tissue, it is using energy, because everything uses energy. You don't have to worry about, well, how do I know that it uses energy? It's because I can tell you that you can now go to university and decide to get a PhD in physics, and at no point in your education from right now to getting your doctorate in physics will you hear a concept of anything like that there's anything in the universe that does not use energy. That doesn't require it, that doesn't use it, that doesn't transfer it, doesn't transmute it, doesn't store it, doesn't project it, there's nothing in the universe that does not use energy. So, old unresolved negative emotional issues, which are inculcated, that means, oh man, I'm getting 2 50-cent words in today. Inculcate means to place within. To place within. So these issues are inculcated and they are stored definitely in physical locations that we can identify, that literally we can measure, we can identify them, we can find them by various ways. These nodes of storage of the old unresolved negative emotional issues will be a place on the body that is warmer than it should be. I'm going to give you a couple of these. It will be an actual spot, a point on the body that's warmer than the surrounding area and warmer than it ordinarily would be or should be on anybody else. Although, here's a really interesting fact. Since so many of us have similar issues, so many of us have the same warm spots. Because it's not random. It's not random how the nemos are stored in the tissue. It's not random. Everything in the universe follows a principle called follow the path of least resistance. Nothing is random. Not even a lightning bolt. The shape of a lightning bolt is not random. It actually follows a geometric pattern, which is referred to as Lichtenberg lines. Plasma distribution through atmosphere is not random. Plasma distribution through atmosphere follows the path of least resistance, density of the ionic distribution in the atmosphere, and that pattern appears to be a brachiating, radiating pattern, which is exactly the same principle that trees follow when they grow, and which is mirrored in the roots of a tree and the top of the tree, which defines why the external-most extension of capillary root system of any given tree will never extend beyond the last leaf of its canopy. It's a mirror image of the tree under the ground. Short and condensed, but mirror image, and the distribution of roots is not random. It follows a pattern called Lichtenberg lines, because that is the way energy or plasma moves through the universe at all levels of scale, and also within us. So as we have patterns of storing energy and blocking energy and distributing energy, it follows predictable lines, these Lichtenberg lines. Now, we call those lines many names. One set of those lines are called the nervous system. Get a good anatomy chart. Maybe we'll dig one up. I have a few floating around somewhere. And separate all the nerves from the body, so you see just an image of the innervation system of the body, spinal cord, cranium, spinal cord, and all of the nerve branches, nerve roots, and so on and so forth. Flip that sucker upside down and you have a tree. And the brachiating pattern of the nerve distribution in the body follows the same sacred geometric principles as a tree follows when it grows. Wow. So no one ever does that. No one ever takes you're looking at your anatomy book and you see the nervous system and you like flip that puppy upside down. Look at it from a completely different point of view, and all of a sudden you see something that you didn't see before. Because we're used to seeing trees upright. We're not used to seeing trees pointing down. And so when you point the nervous system up like this, and you see, all of a sudden you see the brachiating and you see the branches. We also have other names for those lines, because there are different sets of lines that operate at different frequencies. And so we then have meridians. This is another thing that meridians are, and why meridians are evenly and bilaterally distributed in the body. Evenly and bilaterally. It's why if there's a lung meridian over here on my right arm, from the inside of the top, just under my clavicle right here, inside of the deltoid down to the thumbnail, that there's a line just exactly like it on the other side. Even if I don't have that arm, even if that arm is amputated, the lung meridian is still there. How about that? That's been proven scientifically. In Auyurveda, we have prana nadis, two different kinds, Maha and Prana, Mahavada and Pranavada nadis, okay? Maha means great or gross, G-R-O-S-S, great or gross. And gross in medical terms is another word for physical. Okay? So when you hear Maha Nadi, okay, that is your hair. That is every strand of your hair, every hair on your body. That is your nerves and tendons. That is your connective tissue. That is your skeleton. Because the skeleton itself are nadi. Okay? And the Thais, which are an Auyurveda system, just use a different word for prana nadi. Prana is energy, is breath. In fact, the definition of prana is vital life, vital breath of life, or breath of vital life, or any way you want to slop those words around in any order, because there is no exact English translation of the word prana. Okay? But vital life energy or breath of life. So the Thais, being a Vedic system, use the same system of prana nadis that is used in classical Indian and classical Tibetan Ayurveda, and they just have a different word for their nadis, and they call them sen lines, S-E-N. They call them sen lines. Sip sen, the 10 lines of breath, the 10 conduits of pranic force. Prana. In Thai is pana. Oh God, it's so different. Chakra in Thai is chaka. Oh God, it's so different. Can't possibly be related. I'm just kidding. Okay? According to tradition, life itself is an expression of unconditional love. So you want an example of what is unconditional love, we start with the sun and the earth. There's a relationship there that is an example of unconditional love. Every morning the sun rises and brings life to the world, regardless of what's going on in the world. The sun could care less. The sun distributes life to the solar system. And it distributes it so thickly and so tangibly. I mean tangibly. That literally another definition of what is the solar system is it is the body of Sol. In other words, it is the functional body of the sun. That's what a solar system is. Maybe you were in school and you were led to believe that a solar system, even the one that we're in, Sol's system, solar system, right? We're ruled by an old Jewish energy ball, Sol. So, in Sol's system, maybe you have this visualization, which is kind of correct, but totally and completely wrong, of that the Earth is the third rock from the sun. Thank you, John Lithgow. The Earth is the third rock from the sun. The sun is in space. The Earth is spinning around the sun. And there are other planets that are spinning around the sun also. We know the word orbit, and the Earth has an orbit, and maybe you've been really progressive in your education, so you now know that the Earth's axis is off-center, is not perpendicular to its orbit around the sun, and that actually causes a strange effect, which is from winter to summer. The point on the horizon where the sun rises and the sunset changes every day, and it goes from here to there, and then it goes back again like a pendulum, and that's called the precession of the sun. And all of these ancient monuments, from Stonehenge to the pyramids to the whatever, Machu Picchu and so on, were the ancient astronauts and ancient archaeologists, ancient astronomers' way of tracking the precession of the sun, because knowing the precession of the sun, the time and date that the sun rises on a specific point on the horizon tells you exactly where the Earth is in position around the sun. So the ancients were actually tracking every day where the Earth was in relation to the sun. And they felt that was vitally important. In fact, they felt it was so important that of all the things that the ancient people knew and didn't know, the one thing they felt like they needed to make sure was carved in stone and would never be forgotten is this concept of astronomy, of astrology. And that on some level, where we were in relation to the sun determined who we were able to be. Why? Because our life force comes from the sun. The life force of all things comes from the sun. And so they said the sun is the definitive example of unconditional love, and everything else is less than that. But we were told to emulate these universal principles. All the great religions of the world told us to emulate great universal natural principles. Buddhist philosophers in the past also built their temples to mark and to model and to trace the procession of the seasons. Because, for example, it's no accident that great Buddhist festivals occur on full moons and that there are 13 of them a year. That's not an accident. The lunar cycle is tied to the solar cycle. Think of it as like an hour hand and a second hand. The hour hand being the great procession from winter solstice to summer equinox, right? You've heard those. Winter solstice to summer equinox. Winter solstice, we're furthest away from the sun on the elliptical orbit. Our orbit is not round, it's elliptical. By the way, the reason why the Earth's orbit is elliptical is because the sun is in motion. The sun is moving faster than the Earth through space. And the Earth is in the sun's orbit. So as the sun moves through space and the Earth is moving, it draws out the orbit and it creates an ellipse, an elliptical orbit, by the way. Now you know why the Earth's orbit is not round. Because the sun is alive and is moving through space. Faster than a bullet. Much faster than the space shuttle, which can get up to, what, 27,000 miles an hour? Escape velocity is somewhere around 17,000 miles per hour. And it's capable of hitting 27,000 miles per hour. That's lickety-split in Southern speak. Lickety-split. That's the way my dad would say it. They thought this was important. Why? Because great nature is our most perfect example of unconditional love. And we were taught and we're told by all of the ancient societies that we should emulate great nature. And since it is a fact of great nature that love is not something that is conditional, that necessarily is even reciprocal. You see, condition and reciprocity are the same thing. The two halves of the same coin. If your love and expression of your love is conditional on someone acknowledging it or giving back to you or even demonstrably accepting it, by definition it's not unconditional. Reciprocity is a condition. So if we're going to talk about expressing unconditional love, already we've got to start getting away from conditions. Already. We've got to move away from it a little bit. The Thais said that Nuat was a perfect expression of unconditional love when it was done without a requirement for reciprocity or condition. And so in the ancient times, and there are still examples of this still standing, every temple had an area where people could practice being unconditionally loving. And in Thai temple system, they're called Nuat Sala. Nuat Sala. Okay? Nuat Pamboran Thai. Raksa Tang Nuat Pamboran Thai, which is the full name for traditional Thai medicine. Okay? A lot of times people translate it to mean Thai massage, but you know, that's actually not what the words say. What the words say, Raksa Tang Nuat Pamboran Thai. It means the ancient way of healing with the hands or expressing love with the hands of the ancient Thai. That's what the words mean. The old-fashioned, anachronistic, or old-fashioned way of expressing love with the hands of the ancient Thai. Raksa Tangoat Pamboran Thai. Okay? It doesn't mean Thai massage. Colloquially, a lot of people translate it like that and interpret it like that, and that causes a lot of confusion. Because now we're taking a system, a very ancient system that was considered, by the way, absolutely necessary for the formation of every religious society that existed from the Buddha's day, that there was a healing function going on, ongoing in the temple, and that this healing function wasn't just about enabling people to be able to meditate better or to sit longer, or even just to reduce suffering, that in fact the art and the act of healing altogether was an expression of a universal principle called unconditional love. And so every temple that was built had somewhere in the property a building, a structure, a pavilion, if you will, called Nuat Sala, Pamboran Thai. A building which is a designated area in the temple for the free and unfettered expression of unconditional love in the form of healing. And even today in the Grand Palace at Wat Prat Khao in Bangkok, even on the grounds of Grand Palace, there is actually the Nuat Sala that was built when the palace was built is still there. 99% of all the tourists that go through Wat Prat Khao don't know what it is and don't recognize it for what it is, and don't understand that this little pavilion that is, if you're facing the entrance to the bot that houses the Emerald Buddha, and those stairs that go up into the great bot where the Emerald Buddha is, if you're facing that entrance, the Nuat Sala is slightly behind you and off to the left, just outside the entrance. And then there's another one that is directly to your left, on the other side of the little wall there. And if you go up to it, there's actually a little plaque that identifies it in Thai as Nuat Sala Pamboran Thai. It's the place where, when they first built the Royal Chapel, where anybody could go and receive healing. For anything. Anybody could go to receive healing for anything. And the work was done by monks, lay monks, and volunteers. People who wanted to make merit, who wanted to reduce their negative karma in their life, people who wanted to be more Buddha-like, would go there. And if you didn't know what to do or how to do, that's okay. That's all they did there all day long, all day, every day. No matter what else is going on around the temple, probably the only interruptions for that during special high holy days or festivals, like Visakha Puja Day or what have you. But every other day, this activity would be ongoing. And so if you needed healing, you knew that you could go to any temple, and that every temple at least had that. And some temples had whole had hospitals. In other words, comprehensive medical function, even performed surgery, etc. But every temple had a nuatsala. Every temple had a little pavilion that could be used for the expression of healing. Okay? And if you weren't sick and you were able, now a lot of times this happened. For example, there was a man, a gentleman at Putaisawan, who he attended to the steam rooms and the boilers. And apparently he had just been there forever. He was probably about 70 years old. Okay, kind of gnarly. But he was the guy who would have to collect the charcoal to fire the steam boilers, and who would collect the herbal poultices or the Prakop Samun Prai from the therapist and put them in the canisters, because there were several rooms that were numbered, and depending on what was wrong with you, respiratory, metabolism, recovery from an injury, the mix of herbs that you would be steamed in was different. So every room had a basket where steam would be pumped into the room, but there was an intermediary container that had a pressure-fitted lid that you could open up, put the Prakop in, which is a bundle of herbs, a bolus, okay? And then you screw it down, and then you go in that room, and that's what you get steamed with. It's just for you. That's your prescription, your prescriptive steam. Remember I said steams are part of traditional Auyurveda, part of traditional Thai medicine. This is an example. But his job was he maintained the steam rooms and the boiler and set up all the prescriptions. He didn't make the prescriptions, he just set them up for everybody, and then he'd change them out for the next person. And he did this all day, every day, 6 days a week. And I asked him one day how long he had been there, and he said he'd been working there for 25 years. I was like, whoa, that's a long time, 25 years. Yeah, and then he said something really strange. I'm a volunteer. I go, you're a volunteer? He goes, no, I'm not paid to do this. I'm like, you're not paid to do this? He goes, no. I go, why do you do it? Why would you work like it's a job at a place, doing something kind of menial, kind of hot? Remember, there's no air conditioning. He's running the boiler. He's keeping fires going all day long, charcoal fires. He had to schlep the charcoal in 80-pound bags on his back to get them to the back of the shed where the boiler was. 6 days a week, as far as I could tell. And he said, well, 25 years ago, my mother got really sick. And we had no money. And we came here for help for my mom. And they treated her, and she got treated for her disease, which from his description I was thinking was something like cancer. And she didn't die. She got well, and she lived another 20 years. She had just passed away like 5 years previously. Since we had no money, I vowed that I would spend the rest of my life working to help this place in repayment for my mom's healing. And I've been here ever since. I never left. Okay, it blew my mind. It's the first time, actually, I ever physically encountered something like that that was not in a fairy tale. Because I could see this man working every day. And the school and the temple provided him a place to sleep, gave him food, got him clothes when he needed clothes. In other words, the temple took care of him, but he took care of the school as a volunteer, and he'd been there 25 years when I met him. Okay? And that was his story, because Mom couldn't afford to pay for the medicine, And no one charged her for medicine. They said, sure, she's sick, here, come, we'll help you. And they treated her, and she survived, and she lived another 20 years. He thought, I could never make enough money to repay the debt. So I will repay the debt with my effort and my devotion and my dedication, so that other people can have this place and can have this experience and can have this. And I realized as clearly as I could right in that moment that what I was looking at was the result of the expression of unconditional love. The consequence, the ripple effect of the expression of unconditional love, even in the past. In other words, I was benefiting in real time, right then, from an act of kindness, an act of generosity, an act of compassion, an act of love that had taken place 25 years before I got there. Now, when I first came to the United States after leaving Puthai Sawan and decided to start to practice and to teach and so on, I tried to do it the same way that my teachers had taught me to do it, as precisely as I could, and I utterly and completely failed. Just so you know, I utterly and completely and miserably failed. And about a year after I came back from Puthai Sawan, I was living in my car, which was a 1978 Honda Civic, which that's the original one. So I couldn't even fit in the back seat of that car. And it was a hatchback. And it was yellow. And it sounded like a lawnmower. You could see the steering column go through the floor on the inside. The bumper mounts were inside the passenger compartment. You could see the bumper mounts inside the car. That's where I was living. That was my house. And I was broke and I was poor, and I actually got to a point where I literally didn't have gas money to move the car that I was living in. And I had bamboozled a friend of mine who had been a client, and then he felt sorry for me. His name was Jim, and Jim had let me park my car behind he's a physical therapist, and he let me park my car behind his physical therapy practice and borrow a room to do sessions inside of his practice. And here's the way, I was really good, okay, at what I had to offer. I was very good. I was trained by the best, okay? And so people would come in and they'd say, what do you do? And I'd try to tell them what I did, and they'd go, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. As I'd say yoga, words like yoga, and at that time no one had heard of yoga. There was no yoga journal. No one had ever, the first 3-4 years I was practicing, I never met someone who had ever heard of yoga, who hadn't actually gone to India. Okay, and there were no yoga schools in Atlanta, and there was not one. There were no yoga schools. There was no, in a city of 2 million people, not one. Okay? And people would go, how much does it cost? What you do? And I would go, well, it doesn't cost. It is a spiritual service, if you will. And all I would do is ask you that proportional to the benefit that you receive, that you would make a gift to me. Proportional to the benefit that you've received. And if you get a benefit, then you should give me something. And if you don't get a benefit, you don't owe me anything. And everybody would go, okay, fair enough. I'd work on them for 3 hours, and then they would give me $10. And then they would refer to me all of their friends. A year after I started working at Jim's place, which was the only place I had to work after I came back from Thailand, I was doing 8 sessions a day 5 days a week, 3 sessions on Saturday, and I didn't have gas money to fill up the tank of my car, and I couldn't afford rent, and I couldn't afford food much. I was eating once a day because that's all I could afford to do, and I wasn't really able to. I had saved up like $500 in a year, and I was doing 8 sessions a day, 5 days a week, and 3 sessions. I was working 60 hours a week, hands-on, and I was broke. And Jim had worked out a deal. He says, well, since you're working, you know, people are giving you money, you're going to have to pay rent. And we worked out just a stupidly low rent that I was supposed to pay. And I was 3 months behind on my stupidly low rent, and living behind the space where I was working. Sometimes I would sleep on my massage table, but then Jim didn't like that, so he'd tell me I couldn't do that, so I'd have to go sleep in my car. But then he'd forget, and I'd go back and I'd sleep in the room, and you know. And I used his massage table because I didn't have a mat. There was no such thing as mats. Okay, at that time. And so it was a Friday, and that morning he had come to me before my first appointment, as I had a full day of sessions scheduled. And he knew I was always really busy, and everybody loved what I did. 5 stars, referred all their friends every time. I had a waiting list of 6 weeks for new clients. And at the end of an average day, I never had more than $40 or $50 at the end of an average day. That was max. Sometimes I went all day and didn't get any money. Nobody gave me any money. They were like, can I get back to you? You know, I'm kind of like light right now. But thanks. That migraine was killing me. But thanks. That back pain had me disabled for the last 2 years, and I can go back to work now. Woohoo! I'll catch up with you. Jim comes to me and he goes, Anthony, I love you. Love what you do. But I've got somebody who wants to rent the space, and you're 3 months behind on your rent, and you got till 5 o'clock today to pay your rent, or you have to go. And you have to move your car, because the city actually came and complained that they think there's an abandoned car behind my building, and you can't do that. You have to move it occasionally. And I was like, oh man, I was bummed. Technical term for distraught, depressed, anxious, nowhere to go, no money. But I'm up to good things. The universe will provide. I used to say that every day. I'm up to good things. The universe supports what I do. The universe will provide. And then I would look people right in the eye and go, proportional to what you have received. If you would gift me or give to me or make a donation to me, that would be terrific. And if you don't like what you got and you don't believe it has merit or doesn't have a big benefit for you, you don't owe me anything. You don't have to pay for anything. God bless. It's my gift to you, or at least my gift to the universe. I'm paying off some bad karma, maybe. My suffering for not getting paid for what I do. Okay? I justified it lots of different ways. So Jim gives me my exit papers, and I'm depressed, but, you know, I buck up. I have discipline. I can be crashed. I can be in the middle of a divorce. I can be injured. I can be unhappy for various reasons, any reason you can name, and guess what? I can still do what I do. I'm never paralyzed from healing, no matter what's going on in my life. And I'll tell you that's for a fact because I have done all of those things. So that's what I did. First session, came and gone. Told them the same thing I always tell them, hoping that they're going to give me $900 because that's what I was behind on my rent. $900. and they didn't give me anything. First client of the day, nothing. I was like, I've got till 5 o'clock. Second client comes in. New client, someone I've never met before. And she asked me, says, well, how much is it? I heard from my friend that you are the best. And I need the best. I have a real problem, and I need the best. And I heard from my friend that you're the best. Can you help me? I go, I don't know. I do that a lot. Bonnie asks me sometimes if I can help her, and I go, I don't know. I don't know. But let's try. Let's see what happens. Let's do what we can do. You know, I don't know. So I told her, I don't know. Let's just do what we do. And so we had not a long session altogether. I did a little intake, and I worked on, I checked out her doshas, and I took her pulse, and I did a little dosha balancing session. It was actually a kapha balancing session on that day as an emphasis. And then at the end of the session, she was really quiet. And then she got herself together to leave, and she got her purse, and she said, okay, how much, you didn't tell me how much I owed you before we started, how much do I owe you? And I told her what I told every client for the last year, word for word. And she stood there and she looked at me for like a whole minute, didn't move, blink, blink, just looking at me. And then this very elegant, executive type business lady in her suit now kind of leans up close to me and goes, you're shitting me, right? You're fucking with me. The elegant business lady. You're shitting me, right? You're fucking with me. No, really. No, just, give me a number. How much? And I actually repeated myself. Proportional to the benefit that you have received. Blah, blah, blah. If you're not happy with what has transpired for you, you don't owe me anything. It's a gift. And she's tapping her pen on her checkbook, because back then there was only checkbooks. There was no credit cards. It was just, this is 83. So she's tapping her checkbook. She goes, you're serious? I said, do you actually tell your clients it's not like I'm not like the first one, you've done this before, this is a thing that you do? And I go, yes. And then she's quiet for another few seconds, and she goes, and you live in your car? Maybe. I mean, it's none of your business where I live, If I just happen to live in my car. And she goes, is your car here? Like, is that the yellow car that's in the back with all the stuff piled up in it? Is that where you live? Oh, I was so embarrassed. Chagrined. Didn't want to answer. She goes, don't. No details, please. It's not pretty. I know it's not. It's something about your story is not pretty. Says, you're broke, right? And you live in your car. And she goes, my friend said you were the best, and actually she was right. This was the most amazing healing experience I've ever had in my life. And at the same time, I don't know what to do or say, because at the very same moment I'm looking at you as this talented healer, I'm also realizing that I'm looking at someone who is really ignorant and really stupid at the same time. And it's confusing me. I'm not quite sure what to do with you. Her name was Colette. Colette is one of these people who has to do with things. Doesn't like chaos in her life. There's some chaos in her life. It needs to be handled. Right? It's one of these kind of people. Thank God. She goes, what are you going to do now? Is this like your lunch break? I go, yeah, I have a little lunch break, and then I have other sessions during the day. And she goes, what are you going to do for lunch? And she goes, duh. what, like a can of sardines? You got some Tom's crackers in the cabinet over there? I didn't say anything. She goes, don't answer. She says, how about this? I'll buy you lunch. And I'm like, no, no, no. It's completely okay. You don't have to do this. She goes, I'll buy you lunch on one condition. And I go, well, what do you mean? And she goes, if you'll let me ask you a few questions and you'll answer those questions honestly, I will buy you lunch. And I will pay you for your session today, and I will do it according to what you told me was our agreement. I go, fair enough. And I was hungry, and I had like $3.25 in my pocket, and which was left over from the day before, because I had made nothing so far that day. And so we go out, and we get in her Mercedes, and she takes us to the Georgian Club, which is a private executive restaurant club, which still exists. It's where Chef Paul first worked in Atlanta, Georgia, before he moved to New Orleans. And that club still is there. My little brother, who will be here in a few minutes, was the head chef for the Georgian Club for 20 years. Okay? Not at that time. That was much later. So we go to the Georgian Club. We go to the 4th floor, which is where it's the whole 4th floor of this executive office building. And we go in. The private elevator opens up in the club, and it's floor-to-ceiling mahogany. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany. There's a bouquet of flowers, probably 6 foot in diameter, just outside the elevator. And there's a guy right there with a little Dios, and as soon as the elevator opens, he goes, "Ah, Madame, your usual today?" And she goes, "Yeah, I want the private room number 2. And he goes, "Okay." And so we go down, and this really amazingly, it's like Trump Tower kind of level. And we go, he takes us to a private room. And as soon as we go in, there's a beautiful table and chairs, and 5 people come in the room right behind us. And they immediately set up the water, they immediately set up the silverware, they immediately bring fresh flowers in and put on the table, and they dress the table immediately. And then there's 2 waiters, because there's 2 of us. One, because, why would you wait? In other words, why would I have to wait while you're making up your mind what you want to eat? Who does that? Right? And so the waiter comes over to me and goes, what would you like? And I was like, well, I'd like to see a menu. And he just smiled at me, like, oh, poor child. And she goes, Anthony, there's no menu. I go, well, if there's no menu, how do I know what to eat? She says, just say it. Whatever you want, just say it. And they will bring it. I said, well, what if I want? She says, it doesn't matter. Just say it. Whatever you want. You want a lobster, you want a cheese sandwich. You want a bowl of potato soup, you want a beef stroganoff. You want a porterhouse steak, you want a bologna sandwich. You want what? Just say it. Whatever you want, they'll bring. And so I got a club sandwich. I ordered a club sandwich. It was the fanciest thing I could think of at the time. Okay, and so the door was open, and she told him to leave the door open so she could see people as they came in. And we started talking, and she started asking me questions about my life, about my training, about Thailand, about whatever. And she had been to Thailand before. And so she was like, oh, that's fascinating. I didn't even know that whole world existed when I was there. I was in a different place and had a different experience and all this kind of thing. And so we had a really nice dinner. She asked me about 10 or 12 questions. I answered them as truthfully as I could. And when we were done, she goes, okay, so before we go, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give you a check. And so she wrote a check and she handed it to me. And that check was for $5,000. It's for $5,000. And I was like, it's too much. She goes, you don't get to say that. You told me to pay you according to how I was blessed. That was the best treatment I've ever had in my whole life. I'm thinking I'm still being conservative and I'm going to work something out with you. It's worth more than that. What you do is worth more than that. And so I was like, okay. And this man walks by in the hall and she goes, Alvin, stop. Alvin, stop. And this saturnine, real tall guy in a pinstripe suit, looked like a banker to me, you know. Tailored suit, Italian shoes, tailored cuffs. You know, he stops and he backs up and he goes, Colette. He goes, what? And she goes, Alvin, do you have your checkbook? He goes, yes. She goes, get it out. He goes, why? He goes, doesn't matter. She goes, doesn't matter, just get it out. And so he reaches in his coat pocket, he pulls out his checkbook, and she goes, Alvin, this is Anthony. Anthony, this is Alvin. Alvin, write Anthony a check for $2,500. And Alvin's just standing there with his checkbook, and he's looking at her, and she goes, I'll explain later. Just give him a check for $2,500. And Alvin writes me a check for $2,500 and gives it to me. And she goes, I'll explain to you later. He's a therapist. He's going to help you with your back, and we'll work it out later on the schedule. And he's like, well, okay, have a good lunch, and off he goes. Okay, so we leave, and we're going back, and I have these checks. I now have $7,000. $7,000 in checks. And I do not have a bank account. So I kind of go, I have a problem. And she goes, well, what's that? And I go, I don't have a bank account. And she stops the car. It's like, you're shitting me. She goes, oh, I should have guessed. You're broke, you live in your car. You're really kind of like a homeless guy who does therapy. You know, homeless therapy guy. And of course you don't have a bank account. All right, okay, fine. But I don't have all day to spend with you. She gets kind of cranky at me. We go to the bank, her bank. We walk in. Margaret, Anthony, Margaret. You do have a driver's license, right? And I go, yeah, I have a driver's license. She goes, give it to Margaret. Margaret, open up an account for him. Anthony, give her the checks. Margaret, cash those checks. Put half in the account and give him the other half in cash. The bank manager goes, okay. And does just exactly that. Opens up an account for me, which I had until I moved away from Atlanta. That was my account. And she gives me $3,500 in cash. I have a checking account. And then she takes me back to work and she goes, I want to make an appointment for Monday, Wednesday, and Friday next week. And I will pay you in advance for my sessions next week. You have the weekend to come up with how much you want to charge me. And I was like, okay. So I went back and I went and broke into Jim's office and I paid him my rent that I was behind. And I've never been behind in my rent ever since. Never. Not once. Through Colette, I ended up with about 50 high-end clients, professional athletes. I worked on the Bolshoi Ballet, all the lead dancers when they came through the Atlanta on their first world tour. And they paid me what I was worth. Okay? And so I learned some lessons there. One, the practical expression of love and kindness is unconditional. But you also not only have a right to make an income, you have to. Because I was literally one day away from giving it up. and going into fast food. One day. That's how close I was. Teacher, practitioner, one day. Busted, disgusted, homeless, poor, living in my car, one day away from, I'm going to have to walk down to the McDonald's or whatever was there. Whatever was there, who cares? They're hiring. And get a job, a real job, and come up with a strategy so that I wouldn't be homeless. And what Colette taught me was, you can be as spiritual as you want. But because we live in the world that is ruled by the market-driven economy, her words, not mine, because we live in the world which is ruled by the market-driven economy, everything that takes place in the world costs somebody something. And as a spiritual person, the only choice you have is controlling where the cost comes from. Okay? And that you have to be able to support yourself. You have to be able to make a living in order to do spiritual healing work. You have to. You must be successful. In fact, you must be prosperous. Because in our world, you cannot be poor and generous at the same time. You can't be a burden to your neighbors, a burden to your family. Literally, couch surfing on somebody else's sofa who's paying for that sofa and you're not, living off of your family, who maybe is not much better off than you are. And you're going to do healing work. You don't have a space. You don't have a place. You don't have accoutrement that you might need that you can be more effective and more productive with. You're not eating right because you can't afford to. You're not doing the supplements that you recommend to your clients because you can't afford them. And so part of this idea, the practical expression of unconditional love, is in our world, for us to be able to do that, we have to be able to not be a burden on our community. See, in Pa Cruz's world, it was different. And that's why I struggled so much. And actually, after this, I took some of that money and I went back to Thailand and I yelled at him because what he had taught me didn't work in America. Didn't work. And he laughed at me and he goes, "Anthony, not my issue." I go, "What do you mean?" "Not my karma. I'm not American. You're American. I don't live in the creative source of the commercial world. You do. I don't even understand your culture at all. You do. It's your job to sort it out. Not my job. Not my karma. It's your job. And if it's a painful one, so be it. It's painful. Ta-da, everything's painful. Buddha said life is suffering. First noble truth. So you can't cry. I mean, you can cry. It just doesn't make any difference. Cry all you want. Because Pa Cruz Samayan had never bought a suit of clothes. Never in his whole life. He never paid a mortgage. He never paid a phone bill. He never paid a car payment his whole life. Never paid a car. You know what he would do? He would walk out of his office on the grounds at Puthai Sawan and he would head for the front gate. And somewhere between the time he left his office and before he actually got to the street, somebody would show up with a car or a pickup truck and pull right up next to him. And then he would get in and tell him where he wanted to go and what he wanted to do. If he went to the market, he didn't take money with him to the market. If he was going to buy food for the school or buy whatever, like once he bought me clothes because I wasn't dressed appropriate for practice in their opinion. At Puthai Sawan we had to wear uniforms. Okay? he would just go to the market, and he would walk through the market, and he'd say, I want 2 of those, I want 3 of those, get me 4 of those. And whoever was following him would have to get those things and pay for them. And if there wasn't enough money, just because it was a spontaneous thing that he did and nobody thought to bring much money, and we got him to the market, if we ran out of money, you know what happened? The vendors would go catch up with us next time. Or they would go, no, it's donation. He would just walk through the whole market like that, get whatever he wanted. And it would be in the vehicle, it would be in the truck when he went back, and then they would take him back home. And then somebody else would unload the vehicle and put everything away. He wouldn't even look backwards. He wouldn't even pick up a bag. If he needed something repaired at the school, he just would walk out in the yard and go, that's broken, somebody fix that. And then shortly thereafter, maybe a day, maybe a week, maybe a month, it wouldn't be instant, it's not magic. A crew would show up with materials and they would repair the roof, or they would repair the door, or they would do whatever. Once we had a whole bathroom added to the school because he decided that because of me we needed a flushing toilet. And so he just walked around for a day going, we need a Phalang bath with a toilet. And about 2 weeks later, a truckload of guys with some sand and lumber and a toilet showed up, and they put in a toilet. My life doesn't work like that. Right, Rob? My life doesn't work like that. My life didn't work like that. I tried to do the donation thing. Reimburse me proportional to what. See, it doesn't work here. The reason why that doesn't work here is because we have been educated a whole life in the market-driven economy. Everything is about money. Everything costs. And when you tell someone to give you proportional to what they've received, they have no conscious perception of what those words mean. It is complete gibberish. Jibber jabber. Jibber jabber. So how much to save my life worth? Oh, $20. How about $20? I got 10. I'll catch up with the other 10 later. Literally, I had people who were on disability, full-on medical disability for 5 years until they came to me, and by the 4th session they were completely well, no disability and no pain, back to work with a whole life for themselves and for their family, who gave me $20. But really, what is getting you off a 5-year disability and being in constant pain worth? If you did actually give to me proportional to what you received, 10% of your annual income the rest of your life? 20% of your annual income for the rest of your life? Well, what if I make a lot of money? Are you saying that I should give you like 20 grand a year? I'm like, yeah, because you wouldn't have that money if I hadn't helped you. See, that doesn't work. We can't have that conversation here. That's perfectly ridiculous. So what we have to do is we have to value what we do and not lose sight of what we're doing is a practical expression of loving kindness. But it's the practical expression of loving kindness as it is manifesting in the world that we actually live in. And it takes resources. I was very happy. I took a religious course on Buddhism, on Buddhist economics, and how the concept of banking did not originate with the Knights Templar, that the concept of banking originated with the Buddha himself, and that the Buddha actually wrote the first banking rules, the first commerce rules, and the first guidelines for interest on investment for people who would invest in the Buddhist temples during his lifetime. Professor at Berkeley University was translating original Pali text and documents dating from the Buddha's own hand and from contemporaneous to his life. And it was all about commerce and all about economics, and it was lessons that he gave the Sangha on how to be responsible to collect income from the community in order to build temples as systems, not building. Because the first temples weren't buildings. but they still had investment. And he wrote the rules on how farmers were to take a percentage of their harvest and deliver it to the temples in return for access to the teachings and access to the monks and access to the medicine and everything else. There was a quid pro quo. The Buddha wrote the first rules on quid pro quo for exchange of spiritual services for commerce. And with those rules, close to 1 million temples were built all over the world. Great edifices that literally in today's dollars would have cost millions of dollars to build. Literally. And when I heard this, and in the context of Colette's conversation, I realized that who am I? I really just need to acknowledge where I am and never be unclear about what I'm doing or who I am and why I do what I do. But to be functional to do what I do, we have to make money. We have to exchange resources equivalent to money, one way or the other. If you're going to barter, your barter has to be substantially equivalent in value. Don't barter a $700 5-session protocol for a chicken, because it's not equitable. It's not equitable. Barter it for $700 worth of chickens. That's a truckload. So if you're going to barter your sessions for a meal, barter a session for Meals on Wheels, like meals for a year. A truckload of meals. 2 or 3 2-hour trips to Costco. Whatever. Equivalency. Whatever it is, it has to be equivalent. If it's not equivalent, it's not fair. And one of the rules about exchange of spiritual goods, spiritual services, is the exchanges need to be fair. And the only exception to that is when you are injured and you do not have the capacity to fulfill your end of the barter or exchange. And now we go back to my friend who was working the boilers at Puthai Sawan for 20 years. The reason why he did that was it was substantial equivalency of barter. In other words, under the Thai system, a life is worth a life. And if you save someone's life, in the old days, if someone saved your life even from a car wreck or getting run over by a horse, you had a life debt to work for them for the rest of your life. It wasn't, thanks for saving me, see ya. No. Actually, traditionally, you owed them a life debt, which couldn't be paid back in dollars. Because what's a life worth? Give me a dollar amount. See, we've lost all these kinds of concepts. We don't have them in our culture. Okay? But what we can do is we can have equivalency of barter, and we can also have this understanding of what is success and prosperity, what is the requirement for success and prosperity of spiritual healers. That in fact you must be successful. You must be able to pay your way. And it's your responsibility to learn whatever you need to know and to do whatever you need to do to get to that place as quick as possible. Because every day you're not there is a day you're less functional. Not making that contribution, right? Okay? So, the first tapping lesson I want to communicate to you is you've got to start working on your issues. And already, I guarantee for some of you, maybe not for all of you, but for some of you, you have issues with handling money. You have issues with prosperity. You have issues with how can you charge people for healing work that's based on love? How can you even ask for money at all for that? And who are you to be able to do that? And it's because you don't understand there are universal principles here that say you have to. And something will change as soon as you do. Something will change. Why? Because you're now acting more in accordance with natural law. I don't know what prosperity looks like for you. Only you will know. Only you could really say. Okay? But I will say this. your prosperity, if you're going to be a practitioner, therapist, healer, or doctor, your prosperity is going to include that you have a dedicated space where you can practice and where people can find you, that you have an address, that you're not itinerant, and that you can see. In my story, I was considered homeless because I was living in my car. Nowadays, a lot of millennials say it's a mobile lifestyle. They're freegans and have a mobile lifestyle. We used to call that homeless. Okay? Well, it still is homeless, because if your clients can't find you, see, you don't have the liberty of being homeless. You have to be identifiable. You have to be locatable, because mostly people need treatments over time, not one-off, knockoff, wham bam, thank you ma'ams. Okay? They need to come back to you over and over again. You have to be locatable. They have to be able to find you predictably, without a lot of rigmarole. Okay? So, and you need to have a stable place to live. Why? Because your mind is not settled when you don't have a stable place to live. So whatever that looks like, whatever it takes to get into that place, you have to do it. And that's part of your prosperity. If you don't have that place, part of your income goal is to get however much money it takes to create that as fast as possible. And demand that the universe provide that through the benefit of your work. That's what I do. And then expect it to be so. And declare it to be so. The reason why I give scholarships is because I don't want this class to be solely based on finances, whether you can come or not. That's why I'm so generous with the scholarships. However, I don't give them away for free. Why? Because we don't value what we get for free. We're Americans. Free means worthless. So you have to pay something. There has to be a barter and an exchange for there to be a value exchange. That's a universal principle. I didn't make that up. I learned it. You have to do the same thing. You cannot work for free. If you work for free, you will end up working at the fast food place. You will be a waitress. You will be a waiter. You will be a car mechanic. You will be 1,000 other things that have nothing to do with healing. And that's okay. All those people are great. But if you're going to be and declare yourself to be a healer, a therapist, a practitioner, a doctor, then you have to have a different strategy. Okay? You follow me? You dig me? You dig it? Okay. All right. God bless. Let's take a break. Thank you very much. Come back 10 minutes and let's put the maps down and on to the next.